Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. In this episode, the week ending the 27th of July 1924, the Olympics are doomed. Only xenophobia can save them. Meanwhile, we learn about healthy eating 1920 style, and why you should never give a gun to a teacher. Also, good news on crime, and bad news on the dumping of sewage into rivers. But first, some of the other items that have caught my attention this week. The early 1920s were marked, or indeed marred, by interminable conferences on the subject of reparations. Another one has been taking place in London, with the aim of getting the Allies to agree on a united front in their dealings with Germany. It has failed. But it has emerged that the French have realised that the occupation of the Ruhr, that began at the beginning of 1923, has been a failure. Grain prices are up in the Soviet Union, leading to speculation that there's going to be another famine. There's a revolt in Brazil, with the rebels capturing Sao Paulo. The housing bill, the one I mentioned in the 8th of June episode, the one with the massive long-term spending plan, has received its third reading. This effectively means it will become law. Liverpool Cathedral has been consecrated. There's been an ongoing correspondence on the subject of Southern Railway's new timetable. Southern Railway is a government-enforced amalgamation of the railways south of the Thames, which was created at the end of 1922. Some say it's bad, others that it is good. It's difficult to tell from this distance, but what I can say is that I haven't seen similar controversies in the past. The Naval Review has been held at Spithead. A boundary commission has been set up to determine where the border should be between the United Kingdom and the Irish Free State, as it was then known. The government of Northern Ireland has refused to appoint a representative, as it was not a party to the Anglo-Irish Treaty which brought the boundary commission about. A case has now been brought before the courts to compel the Northern Ireland government to appoint a representative. In other Ulster news, the Duke and Duchess of York, i.e. the future King and Queen, have been visiting the province this week. On Tuesday, the Times published an advert for UGB milk bottles. It turns out that receiving your milk in a bottle, rather than from a ladle into a can, was a new thing in those days. Doorstep milk deliveries in England disappeared completely about 20 years ago. The American consul has been murdered by a mob in Tehran, after taking a photograph of a group of worshippers. 2 teachers were found shot dead in Rotherhithe. It appears that one shot the other in a dispute over a woman teacher, and then shot himself. If further evidence that teachers and firearms don't mix, a teacher has been charged in the machine gun smuggling case I mentioned in the 6th of July episode. Leighton Borough Council has been fined for dumping raw sewage into the River Lee. I was a bit puzzled by this. I didn't know that water treatment was state-owned in those days. I was also surprised that anyone cared. I thought the Thames, to which the Lee is a tributary, was at the time a dead river. This may have come about because the state is short of money. But the Inland Revenue has come up with a neat way, other than by, doing its job, of raising a few pennies. According to a clergyman, when he turned over his tax return, he found an advert for a pearl necklace. On Wednesday, the Times published a photo of a scene from a West End play starring the American actress Tallulah Bankhead. Somehow I don't think they will be publishing any of the more lurid allegations about her private life. It has been announced that the price of bread is to rise from 9p to 9.5p for a £4 loaf. Everywhere. At the same time. Nowadays that would be classed as collusion, but not then. There was a hailstorm in London. There was also a hailstorm in Switzerland, which did a great deal of damage in Montreux. Eric Liddell, winner of the 400 metres at the Paris Olympics, was feted in Edinburgh. It was interesting to note that in a speech he made no reference to his decision to compete in the 400 metres rather than the 100 metres. Talking of the Olympics, Gertrude Ederle, not quite sure, the American swimmer, won bronze in the 100 metres freestyle. She will become better known for becoming the first woman to swim the Channel. The British Medical Association is holding a meeting in Bradford. A Dr. Boyd Orr had this to say on the subject of diet. Fortunately, mineral deficiencies can be easily corrected by including in the diet foodstuffs the virtues of which are universally recognised. Milk, green vegetables and certain fruits are rich in calcium. Milk, egg yolk and cereals containing sufficient of the embryo and outer part of the grain are rich in phosphorus. Green vegetables and egg yolk are rich in iron. And I thought green vegetables being good for you was a new idea. This week, C.P. Trevelyan, Minister of Education, introduced the estimates, as they were known. This is from the Times' report. See if there is anything that sounds familiar. He, Trevelyan, aimed at a determined effort to reduce the size of classes throughout the country, a high standard of staffing in the elementary schools, a steady increase in the use of trained teachers, and a progressive disuse of untrained teachers, especially in the supplementary grades, and the replacement of the worst class of school buildings. Class sizes and collapsing school buildings. Then as now. Funny that Tesco never seems to have a problem with its buildings. The report went on. The present government felt that the central need was a great expansion of secondary education and of equivalent types of advanced education. His idea was that whereas now there were fewer than 10 per thousand of our population in secondary schools, they should seek to double that number. Targets in education. The arrogance of it. He, C.P. Trevelyan, knows what is best for children, but their parents do not. Also note the rather odd measurement being used. It rather depends on what proportion of the population is of secondary school age. That can change. On Friday, the Times reported on the Metropolitan Police's report on crime in 1923. At present the beats are greatly depleted, proceeds the report. In most cases the men are patrolling 2 and frequently 3 or 4 beats instead of 1. Short of money, eh? The report on women police shows how much has changed. The establishment of the women police has 2 inspectors, 2 sergeants and 16 constables. Although the power of arrest had been conferred upon the women police, practically no use had been made of it. That was attributable to the fact that the duties they performed were not strictly police duties, but more in the nature of rescue work among young women and girls. The report also revealed that 81 police officers were bitten by dogs. It also had this to say. There were 27 cases of alleged murder of persons above 1 year of age, as against 28 in 1922. And no case of unsolved murder occurred during the year. Do I put this down to good policing, or fitting up innocent men to make the numbers look good? I prefer to believe in good policing. Of the murder cases that have come up in the last year or so, there has been very little doubt over the perpetrator. A couple of weeks ago I mentioned that some felt that the Olympics were in need of slimming down. This week some feel that the Olympics need abolishing altogether. This was from the Times' special correspondent. Olympic Games doomed. Failure of the ideal. Disgraceful scenes. To write this article is like delivering the funeral oration of the Olympic Games. Not of these particular games only, which will come to a natural end in the course of a week or so, but of the whole Olympic movement. The ideal which inspired the rebirth of the Games, the first modern Olympiad took place in 1896, was a high one, namely by friendly rivalry and sport to bind together the youth of all nations in a brotherhood so close and loving that it would form a bulwark against the outbreak of all international animosities. The events have shown that the world is not yet ripe for such a brotherhood. There has for a long time been profound and widespread misgiving whether the Games had not in practice served to inflame animosities rather than to allay them. Disagreeable incidents cropped up at most of the earlier meetings, but culminated in the unpleasantness of Stockholm. There was a hope that after the war a new spirit might prevail. I'm not quite sure what this unpleasantness of Stockholm is all about. I don't recall anything at the time. The incident which has brought things to a crisis so far as Great Britain is concerned occurred in the boxing on Friday night when Malin, our middleweight champion, had to meet the Frenchman Bruce. Good name for a boxer. The latter fought foully from the start, and was several times warned by the referee. He continued his tactics, and instead of being disqualified, was allowed to stay out this time. In the course of the fight he bit Malin severely on his chest, the teeth marks being plainly visible still. In spite of his foul tactics, he was clearly outclassed and outpointed throughout the fight, and the judges gave the decision to Bruce. This, of course, is only an incident, and one incident should not be enough to make us withdraw from the games. But it was a culmination of what has been going on since the first free fight broke out in the French-American rugby football match. That's awful. I wonder if there's any footage. According to Wikipedia, things got very nasty. In contrast with a persistent hostility to the Americans. Indeed, our treatment even at times has seemed almost cordial, and the British athletes have, without exception, managed to bear themselves, not, I imagine, sometimes without considerable effort, smilingly and well, because we're British and we're better than everybody else. It should even more clearly be put on record that the Americans have behaved admirably. Under extreme provocation, they have shown nothing but good humour and generous sportsmanship. And it may be that, if the hopes we have built of the games are to go, the gain from the closer drawing together of the British and American athletes, after having been tried here in the same furnace together, will more than counterbalance the loss. The fact is that it has once more been demonstrated with dreadful clearness that the games exacerbate international bitternesses instead of soothing them. It is useless to attempt to create a brotherhood of sport which will react to the improvement of political relationships so long as these political relationships are permitted from the outset to embitter and demoralize the sport. Things got worse when the Italians walked out of the fencing. It got so bad, the Times wrote an editorial. Miscellaneous turbulence, shameful disorder, storms of abuse, free fights, and the drowning of the national anthems of friendly nations by shouting and booing are not conducive to an atmosphere of Olympic calm. They are competing against one another in sports no one cares about. The only basis that a spectator can choose who to support is nationality. So immediately everything is seen through a nationalistic lens. So it's no surprise that the games are marked by chauvinism. The point is that the Olympics did survive. I would dare to suggest not because they held up Olympic ideals, but the exact opposite. It became a way for nations to best other nations. That's why it has survived to this day. International brotherhood is possible. I dare to say I've experienced a bit of this, and it happens when people from different nations cooperate with one another. This could be talking to one another, or working for the same company, or playing on the same football team, or participating in a scientific conference. But competition is going to do the precise opposite. It will exacerbate tensions. And it wasn't just the Olympics that was affected. Another regrettable incident occurred in Paris last night. The last stage of the Tour de France, the annual bicycle race around France, ended yesterday, and the Italian crack Ottavio Battecchia was enthusiastically hailed as the victor, when he rode into the Parc des Princes half an hour ahead of his nearest competitor. He had covered the distance of 3,372 miles in 226 hours, 18 minutes and 21 seconds. Later in the evening, says Lauto, while Battecchia was dining with some friends in a restaurant near the Gare de Lyon, a band of anti-fascists invaded the dining room and, threatening him and his friends with violence, tore up the Italian flag which decorated their table. Tour de France aficionados will know that this year's tour, for the very first time, is finishing in Nice. This is because, so they say, of the Olympics. But 100 years ago, there was no problem with the two events taking place in Paris at the same time. What, one wonders, has changed? Anyway, that's all for this week. I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.